The air that afternoon smelled of wet leaves and rusted fences. Vermont rain has a way of clinging to everything it seeps into: wood, into wool, into bones. I remember holding that little porcelain bird wrapped in linen, the one my husband gave me on our wedding day. Its wings had faded gold edges. I used to think they shimmered like hope. The road to my daughter's house was slick and quiet. Every sound was softened by rain, every thought dulled by the rhythm on the windshield. I hadn't visited in weeks. Claire had been tired working long hours. I thought I'd surprise her with dinner, a story, and the bird. Something to remind her that love, like porcelain, can survive decades if you handle it gently. But when I reached the porch, I heard laughter. Not my daughter's. A man's deep voice and a younger woman's giggle tangled through the open window. And then Ethan's voice, my son-in-law, smooth, confident. "She'll sign anything if I tell her it's for taxes." I froze. The bird slipped from my hand. Porcelain met stone, one clean crack that sounded like thunder inside my chest. The rain never stopped that day, only my trust did. Inside, I saw through the glass Ethan leaning close to Sophie, the neighbor girl, all bright nails and new perfume. She was laughing, tracing circles on a document spread across the kitchen table. The papers were thick, official. At the top, I could read the words, "property transfer." My heart went quiet like it knew before my mind did. 15 years a widow, 40 years in that house. And now, my own daughter's husband trying to take it away brick by brick, signature by signature. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. The rain kept falling soft but merciless, like it wanted to wash away what I was seeing. Sophie said, "She trusts you, Ethan. You could ask for anything." He smiled, not cruelly, just easily. "That's the point. She's like a mother to me." Mother. The word hit like heat under my ribs. I stepped back from the window, clutching the broken bird in my coat pocket. Its wing bit into my palm. Would you have walked away too? Or would you have knocked on that door and watched everything you built collapse? I chose silence. I walked back to the car, rain soaking through my scarf, my shoes the years of patience I'd built. Each step felt like a secret I had to carry. I sat behind the wheel, watching the house blur through the windshield. Inside, their shadows moved like a dance I wasn't invited to. I wanted to scream, but the sound stayed somewhere deep, heavy, wordless. "Silence remembers," I whispered. It always does. I started the engine, but I didn't drive. I just listened to the rain hitting metal to my breath, trying not to break. Memories of Ethan helping fix my fence, painting the nursery before Lily was born, came back in flashes. His easy smile, his promise, "I'll take care of them, Margaret. Always." How quickly always can end. The bird's broken wing pressed against my palm until it drew a tiny line of blood. It didn't hurt. Pain was somewhere else, quiet, methodical, burning slow like heat through glass. When I finally drove home, the world outside was gray, the kind of gray that eats color. Inside the house, everything was where I'd left it, except the air. The air felt heavier, like truth had moved in. I laid the bird on the kitchen table, one wing intact, one missing. The fracture glittered under the light, thin and perfect. Even broken things can catch light. I wrapped the pieces carefully. I couldn't throw it away. You see, even the quietest wings remember how to fly. I made tea. I didn't drink, sat by the window, and replayed their voices in my head. "She'll sign anything. Anything." I opened my old ledger, the one where I kept grocery lists and birthdays, and wrote down everything I remembered: date, time, words, rain. I didn't know what I was building, not yet. But I knew one thing: the silence that had protected them would soon protect me. If you've ever stood in the rain holding something broken, you understand. That moment when you realize love doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it's the knife that cuts the deepest. Would you have done the same? Stayed quiet, or walked inside and burned the world down? If you felt that kind of silence, tell me below. Share it so others know they're not alone in the rain. Later that night, I placed the bird by the window, its missing wing turned toward the glass. Outside, thunder rolled over the lake, low and distant. I could see my reflection faintly, older, smaller, but not gone. The storm would pass. They always do. But trust, once cracked, never quite fits the same again. Still, somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the first sound before a storm learns its own name. The rain never stopped that day, only my trust did. The night I came home, the house smelled of cedar and rain. The storm had passed, but its silence stayed thick, listening patient. I lit one lamp and watched the dust swirl in its yellow glow. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar. Grief has a way of rearranging the air. It makes even the ticking clock sound suspicious. I took off my wet coat, laid it on the chair, and opened the drawer where my late husband's ledger waited. A small brown book with a leather spine worn smooth by years of steady hands. He'd written in it every week. Milk lumber gifts insurance, the story of a life paid in honesty. I ran my finger down the spine. Numbers don't lie. People do. When Claire got sick last winter, I'd given Ethan access to the family account. He'd offered it so kindly, said it would make things easier while she recovered. I'd trusted him. Trusted the man my daughter chose. Now I wondered what exactly I'd signed. I turned a page. His handwriting mixed with mine, his neat, tight letters against my husband's faded ink. 2 worlds overlapping. I traced one entry. Withdrawal, $1,200 unknown recipient. $1,200, not once, not twice, dozens of times, always the same amount, always vague. I wrote it down again in red pen beside the date. Old habits die hard, the teacher in me still grading truth in margins. I listened to the clock. Each tick sounded like a heartbeat I couldn't slow. He wouldn't, I whispered to no one, but the silence disagreed. I started recording my voice, shaky, low, uncertain. If anything happens to me, I said softly, this is the truth. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was instinct, the one that wakes mothers in the middle of the night when something's wrong, even miles away. I turned back to the ledger, numbers spilling like breadcrumbs across the months. Each figure a footprint of trust misplaced. He'd been using the joint family fund, my husband's savings, Claire's future, to buy stocks in a company I'd never heard of. Why, I whispered. But the paper, loyal as ever, gave me no answer. Would you have stopped there? Or would you have kept turning the pages, hoping one might forgive you for looking? The porcelain bird sat on the table beside me, its broken wing freshly glued. A small scar ran through the white glaze, catching the light like a whisper of gold. I remembered what my husband used to say. Even cracked things can tell the truth. Maggie sometimes better than the perfect ones. I believed him, so I began my own ledger, not of money, but of trust. Every time Ethan called me Mom, I marked it down. Every time he avoided my eyes, another note. The pattern was there, a rhythm of taking wrapped in tenderness. Numbers don't lie. People do. I could almost hear the ledger breathing, steady, patient, waiting for me to accept what it already knew. The next morning, I brewed coffee strong enough to burn through denial. Sunlight touched the table where the bird sat, wing-repaired body still fragile. Outside, fog hovered over the lake like unspoken words. I looked at the ledger again and saw something I'd missed: Ethan's handwriting next to my husband's initials, copied perfectly. A forgery. Precise, practiced, confident. My hand trembled. Not from fear this time, but from heat, the kind that rises when betrayal finds its name. I closed the book and whispered, enough. It wasn't anger that steadied me. It was arithmetic. I'd been counting my grief too long. Now I'd start counting evidence. If you've ever discovered betrayal written in someone else's handwriting, tell me below. If silence has ever taught you more than love, share it. Follow family revenge stories for more real healing for those who still believe truth leaves a paper trail. That night, I played back my recording. The sound of my voice felt older than I remembered. Tired, yes, but firm. I wrote another note in the margin, truth logged, heart pending. Then I glued the bird's other wing, aligning the crack until it almost disappeared. Even broken things deserve the chance to hold light again. As I turned off the lamp, the ledger lay open, its pages fluttering in the faint wind from the window. Each number, each line, small proofs of what silence had seen. I smiled just slightly. Even paper can hold more truth than a promise. The house was too quiet that night. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that waits, listening, holding its breath. The lake outside was a sheet of glass, reflecting the window's yellow light, and for a moment I thought I saw movement, two shapes passing by the edge of the curtain, but it was only me and the faint echo of someone I used to trust. I called Claire. Her voice came weak and soft, a whisper wrapped in exhaustion. "Mom, Ethan's been amazing. He's handling everything. You don't need to worry." I wanted to tell her what I'd seen, what I knew, but her voice was so tired, so sure, and I couldn't break what little piece she had left. When I hung up, the room felt smaller. Every reflection has a secret. I picked up the cloth and began wiping the mirror above my dresser. Each circle I made caught bits of light from the lamp gold, then dull, then gold again. Outside, across the road, Sophie's window glowed pale blue. Ethan's car sat in her driveway. Engine cold. Lights off. I told myself maybe he was helping her with papers, something innocent, something simple. But truth has a taste, and once you've swallowed it, nothing sweet will ever feel the same again. I dialed his number. He answered on the third ring. His voice was steady, smooth as glass. "Oh, hi, Mom. Working late. The land deed's a mess. I'll be home soon." I watched the blue light flicker in Sophie's window. Then I heard it, a laugh light and careless, carried by wind through the night air. He hung up before I could say goodbye. And that laugh, it didn't stop echoing. Would you have believed him, or believed what your eyes were trying to tell you? I stared at the mirror until my reflection blurred. 68 years old, pale under lamplight, shoulders slightly bent. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked afraid, not of him, not of what he'd done, but of what she'd have to do next. I'd spent a lifetime teaching my daughter about kindness, about trust, about choosing love over suspicion. But I'd never taught her how to see deceit, how to sense the way it hums just under someone's smile. And now she trusted the man who was quietly pulling our lives apart. Silence remembers. It always does. So I let silence sit beside me that night. It said nothing, but it kept me company. Every creak of the house, every sigh of the wind, all of it whispered, "You already know." The next morning the air was heavy with fog. I poured coffee I didn't drink and stood by the mirror again. In its surface, I saw both of us, me standing still and behind me, the ghost of who I used to be before the lies. Every reflection has a secret. Sometimes it shows the truth you can't say out loud. I thought about Claire again, how her faith in him was pure, untouched. That kind of faith doesn't break easily. It shatters. Maybe people choose to believe lies because truth feels too expensive, because truth asks you to give up the life you built on it. If you've ever had to watch someone you love walk blindfolded into pain, tell me below. If your silence ever protected them longer than your words could share it. Follow family revenge stories for more real healing, for those who learned that seeing isn't always believing. That evening I sat on the edge of the bed. The mirror caught the last light of sunset red, turning gold, turning gray. My reflection softened. She wasn't afraid anymore, just tired. Maybe this is what strength looks like when it's old. Not loud, not sharp, just a woman holding the truth quietly until the world catches up. I turned the mirror slightly so it faced the window. Outside, the lake rippled with faint wind, scattering my reflection into 1,000 pieces. For the first time, I wasn't sure which one of them was really me. Mirrors never lie. People do. The rain had stopped that morning, but the house still smelled like damp wood and paper. I sat by the window, the light a soft gray, the kind that makes ink bleed slower. My pen hovered above the first line. My dear Claire. I wrote it 3 times. Each time the words looked like strangers on the page. The clock ticked behind me louder than my own breath. I tried to explain everything, the bank transfers, the forged signature, the nights I watched her husband's car parked in places it didn't belong. Halfway through, I stopped. Because even as I wrote the truth, I knew she wasn't ready to read it. Silence is the loudest confession. That evening, I called the bank. The voice on the other end sounded young, polite, almost cheerful. "Yes, Mrs. Hayes. I can confirm there have been regular withdrawals labeled as renovation expenses." My throat went dry. "Renovation," I whispered. "Yes, ma'am. All authorized under your joint signature, but I hadn't signed anything in months. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the receiver for a long time as if it could apologize. Ethan's handwriting had always been neat, practiced. I'd once admired that about him. Now I saw it differently, precision used as camouflage. I printed every statement the bank would let me download, page after page, line after line, each number a small betrayal dressed in decimals. Then, with trembling hands, I placed them into an envelope and wrote across it, "For Claire, if I'm gone. Would you have done the same? Would you keep the truth sealed, waiting for the moment it matters most?" The next day I went to the small library down the road. The neighbor's grandson, a boy of maybe 12, was there again. Bright eyes, clever fingers. He'd helped me fix my email once, said I should learn encryption if I wanted to keep secrets safe. So I asked him how. He smiled, proud to teach someone older. Here, he said, showing me step by step. When he left, I typed my first secure message. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. To Claire. Subject, truth, backup01.zip, body. If you're reading this, you'll know what to do. I saved it. Didn't send it, just saved it. Some truths need to breathe before they fly. If you've ever written words you couldn't bear to send, tell me below. Sometimes keeping them is the only way to stay alive. That night the wind pushed against the old glass panes. The letter lay folded on the kitchen table beside the porcelain bird I'd mended weeks before. Its crack shimmered faintly under lamplight, fragile but still whole. I looked at it and thought maybe that's what truth is too. The house was so still I could hear my pulse in my ears. I whispered aloud, "Silence is the loudest confession," and for the first time I believed it. Not because silence meant weakness, but because it meant choice. Ethan's lies were everywhere in signatures and phone calls, in the careful way he smiled when Claire wasn't looking. But my silence wasn't his to own. It was mine, and I would use it not as surrender, but as evidence. I slipped the letter into a drawer under my scarves, right next to my wedding ring, the one I hadn't worn in 15 years. The next morning I walked to the mailbox, the letter in my hand. The sky was pale, washed clean after the storm. I stood there for a long time, just me, the road, and the waiting slot of cold metal. Then slowly I folded the letter back into my pocket. Not today, not yet. Sometimes silence buys time. Sometimes it saves it. As I walked back, the sun finally touched the lake. The water shimmered soft and forgiving, as if it knew the weight of unspoken things. Inside, I placed the letter under my pillow. Maybe one day Claire will find it. Maybe she won't. Either way, it's all there. Every word I couldn't say. Sometimes the unsent letters save us. The house creaked before I even touched the door. It wasn't the kind of sound wood makes when it's old. It was sharper, almost human, like a throat clearing before confession. The air inside smelled of paint and sawdust, with something underneath, something that didn't belong. Maybe guilt has its own scent. I'd come, as Ethan said, to check the progress. But deep down I already knew progress wasn't what this house was holding. The walls felt warmer than they should have been. They remembered. They always do. I walked through the kitchen, the same one where Claire used to bake on Sunday's flour, floating like dust in sunlight. Now every counter was covered in plastic and blueprints. A hammer leaned against the wall, half buried in plaster. I ran my hand over the cabinets, and the sound it made, the faint rasp of skin on wood, felt almost like breath. That's when I saw it, a thin manila folder tucked behind the spice rack. Old habits die hard. I pulled it free. Inside was a document labeled Partnership Agreement. Below the title, Ethan and Sophie's names, and beneath them, my signature. Perfectly forged. My knees went weak, and for a moment I thought I might laugh. Because what else do you do when your whole world becomes a photocopy of your trust? I whispered to the empty room. You've done it now, haven't you? The walls didn't answer, but the floorboard beneath me groaned like an old witness remembering too much. The porcelain bird I had glued before the one that had sat on the sill through every storm was gone. Then I saw it half hidden under the counter, broken again, this time shattered. The pieces sparkled under the fluorescent light like tiny white teeth. I bent down my fingers, brushing over them, and one sharp edge cut into my palm. It bled just enough to remind me I was still here, still flesh, still capable of pain and proof, Walls remember what people forget, I murmured, and this one remembered everything. Would you have left right then? Or would you have stayed to see what else the house would say? I turned on my phone's recorder. I didn't plan it. It was instinct survival wrapped in sound. Then through the thin walls, I heard Sophie's voice. She was laughing. I couldn't see her, but I knew she was near the back porch, maybe on the phone. Her tone changed softer now, careful. I told him she'd never notice. She still thinks we're renovating. The deal's done once she signs. He said he'll handle her. My breath froze. Every word sliced the air thinner. The phone trembled in my hand, but I kept recording. When she hung up, I pressed stop, the red circle dimming like a dying ember. Silence filled the space again. But it wasn't empty. It was alive, heavy, as if the house itself had just heard a confession. I looked around that kitchen one last time, the same window where Claire used to wave from her hair haloed by the morning sun. The same floor where Ethan had once fixed a leak, laughing, saying he'd make it perfect again. Now every tile felt colder. Every light bulb hummed with secrets. I whispered, "The house knows, and it will speak." And I believed it, because I'd lived long enough to learn some places hold the truth, even when people bury it. I packed the contract and the broken porcelain bird into my bag. Both evidence, both memory, both things I could no longer ignore. If you've ever walked into a room and felt betrayal breathing in the walls, tell me below, if silence ever told you more than words could share it. Follow Family Revenge Stories for more truths that finally found a voice. When I left, the door didn't close easily. The wood had swollen from humidity, or maybe from the weight of what it had heard. I pushed it shut and stood there for a moment, listening. No birds, no wind. Just the faint creak of the house settling behind me, or maybe refusing to rest. I thought of Claire still believing in him, still sick, still trusting. I couldn't tell her yet, not until I had everything. But I would, because even silence eventually cracks under guilt. And tonight the house had whispered enough. Even silence creaks under guilt. The chalk still smelled faintly of dust and memory. I hadn't used that old whiteboard in years. It leaned against the wall behind the sofa, yellowed around the edges, the ghost of old lessons still faint beneath the surface. When I dragged it into the living room, the floor creaked in slow protest, as if the house knew what I was about to do. Once this was where I taught children how to spell kindness and count truth. Now it would hold a different kind of lesson. Lesson 1, I whispered to the empty room, never underestimate a quiet woman. I turned the living room into a classroom again, not for students, for evidence. The table was covered with receipts, bank statements, photographs, and printouts marked in red ink. Every date circled, every dollar traced, every lie documented like a failed exam. I taped them across the wall one by one, the sound of the paper tearing from its edge sharp as chalk on slate. At the top, I wrote 3 words in neat handwriting: evidence, motive, opportunity. The old teacher in me still loved order, even if what I was ordering now was pain. The sunlight shifted through the curtains, drawing thin white bars across the board like lines on a prison window. Ethan's name appeared again and again beside false transfers, fraudulent signatures, fake invoices, and then another name: Claire. My heart clenched before my eyes could believe it. Not as the villain, no, not her. As the victim unknowingly written into their plan, her signature forged, her trust weaponized, and still she called him my rock. Would you have told her? Would you have risked breaking her world just to save it? I found my old phone in the drawer, heavy with years and dust. It couldn't do much, but it could still record. I used it to capture every call I made, every whisper that passed between Ethan and the banks, Sophie and the contractor. Each clip saved like a diary of betrayal. Then I hid a small camera in the vase by the window, the one Ethan had gifted me 2 birthdays ago. Funny how betrayal can be recorded inside its own generosity. The next few days I moved through the house quietly, like I was haunting it, every step careful, every sound deliberate. Even the kettle seemed to hiss in rhythm with my heart. I was back in my element, not as a victim, but as a teacher preparing her final lesson. Class, I said softly, smiling at the wall of papers. Today, we study human ethics. Chapter 1. Deception. Silence answered, patient, loyal. Silence has always been my best student. If you've ever had to turn your pain into purpose, tell me below. If your silence ever became your weapon, share it. Follow family revenge stories for those who learn to survive with grace. Night after night, I traced patterns in the evidence. Each detail whispered something new. The account transfers from Claire's medical fund, the partnership agreement tied to Sophie's company, the fake renovation bills used to justify everything. And behind every number, every line of print, was Ethan's calm, deceitful handwriting, the same hand that once toasted family dinners and said grace at my table. The heat rose behind my eyes, steady and slow. It wasn't rage anymore, it was focus. It was the kind of heat that forges iron, not the kind that burns it. I stood before the whiteboard again. 3 words stared back at me: evidence, motive, opportunity. And beneath them I added a 4th: justice. That night I looked at my reflection in the window and almost didn't recognize her, the woman who had once taught children to dream, now plotting how to expose a thief within her own family. But there was no guilt left in me. Only clarity. Only calm. When morning came, I brewed coffee and watched the light rise across the papered wall. It looked beautiful, almost sacred. Each sheet fluttered softly with the breeze, as if the house itself was exhaling, relieved that someone was finally listening. Claire called around noon. Her voice sounded lighter. "Mom, Ethan says we're almost done with the renovations. You'll love it when it's finished." I smiled into the receiver. "That's wonderful, darling. You've always deserved a beautiful home." Then quieter so only I could hear it, "And the truth deserves its place there too." When I hung up, I returned to the board. One corner had smudged where my hand brushed too close. The word justice blurred slightly, fading into a soft gray. But maybe that's how truth begins, not perfect, but persistent. That evening, I stood before the board one last time, marker in hand, surrounded by paper ghosts. The old whiteboard gleamed faintly under the lamp scratches, catching light like scars that refused to disappear. I took a breath and wrote one final line beneath it all. Slow, deliberate, each letter steady. Lesson 1, never underestimate a quiet woman. Then I capped the marker, stepped back, and smiled. The teacher in me was alive again, not to instruct children, but to grade lies. And tomorrow, the first test begins, because teachers never stop grading lies. The candles flickered before anyone spoke. 70 years. And yet the flames seemed older than me, tired, trembling, knowing. The room smelled of frosting and old flowers, the kind you buy out of duty, not love. Claire had set the table herself. Bless her heart, napkins folded like tiny wings. Ethan poured wine too generously, as always. Sophie laughed at something small, too loud, too bright. And in that moment, I realized light can lie. Candles reveal what shadows hide. The cake was white with pink roses. 7 candles stood in a neat row, their glow dancing across silver forks and strained smiles. "Make a wish, Mom," Claire said, her voice soft but already breaking at the edges. I smiled. "In a moment, darling. Let's enjoy the company first." I turned to Ethan, his sleeves rolled neatly, wedding ring shining like it still meant something. "Ethan," I asked, gentle as silk, "do you remember the day I handed you the house key?" His fork paused midair. "Of course," he said, forcing a chuckle. "You trusted me before I even trusted myself." Did I? My tone was calm, but the silence that followed wasn't. Sophie looked down. The air between us thickened, sweet with vanilla, bitter with truth. "Would you have asked him too? Would you have waited this long to open the wound?" Claire tried to save the moment, bless her. She raised her glass, said something about family, about years that passed too fast. But her eyes kept darting between us, between the husband she loved and the mother who suddenly felt like a stranger. The room was breathing differently now, slow, uneven. Even the clock on the wall seemed hesitant to tick. I reached for my phone resting quietly beside the plate, and before the next toast, I pressed play. A voice Sophie's filled the room, crackling, slightly distant but unmistakable. "Once it's signed, we can list it." The sound cut through laughter like a blade through soft cake. Sophie froze. Ethan's hand twitched. Claire's lips parted, but no sound came out. And for a moment, no one breathed. I watched them all. Faces I'd loved, faces I'd fed. The truth had entered the room, and there was no chair left for denial. Ethan's voice came first, rough, defensive. "Margaret, you've got it wrong. That's taken out of context." I looked at him, truly looked, and saw not the man I once welcomed, but the boy who never learned consequence. I didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. Context, I said quietly, is what liars use to repaint the truth. He swallowed hard. Sophie tried to speak, but her words died before they were born. Claire stood suddenly pale as the frosting. "Mom, what is this?" Her eyes darted between us, searching for something to hold on to. "It's the truth, sweetheart," I whispered. "The one you didn't want to see." She shook her head, whispering, "No, not Ethan, not him." And then she collapsed like the air had been pulled out of her. The candles still burned. Their tiny flames swayed above untouched cake wax, pooling like tears on the frosting. Ethan knelt beside Claire, shouting her name, panic finally replacing arrogance. Sophie reached for a napkin but dropped it, hands trembling mascara streaking like black rain. I stayed seated. My heart beat steady. Years of grief had trained it well. I reached for the nearest candle, its flame wavering in the draft. "Make a wish, dear," I said softly, eyes on Ethan. But wish clean. He stared back at me, eyes full of something I couldn't quite name. Fear, regret, recognition. The house key I once gave him might as well have been a weapon now. If you've ever sat at a table where truth finally spoke, you know this silence. If you've ever lit candles that burned more than wax, share it below. Follow family revenge stories for more tales where justice finds its breath. When the ambulance came, the candles were still burning. The nurse tried to blow them out, but I stopped her. "Let them finish," I said, because every flame had a story, and mine was finally told. As they carried Claire out, her hand brushed mine weak but trusting. "I know now, Mom," she whispered. "I know." Her voice was faint, but it was enough. I turned back to the table. The cake half melted the air, thick with sugar and shame. The room glowed in soft amber light, flickering across walls that had heard too much. Some candles don't celebrate life. Some burn truth into the air. The tea steamed between us, curling upward like quiet breath in a winter morning. The cup was porcelain white, with a thin gold rim cracked near the handle just enough to catch light. Daniel Ross. My lawyer noticed it before I did. He smiled faintly and said, "Cracks like that make things interesting." I smiled back, thinking how fitting that was, because by then, I'd stopped hiding mine. The room smelled of bergamot and old paper. The clock ticked in the corner, slow and deliberate, the rhythm of justice, not haste. He opened the file I'd prepared, his brows lifting page after page. Finally, he looked up and said, almost laughing, "Mrs. Hayes, you could teach a course in civil investigation." I took a sip of tea, the crack in the cup glinting under soft afternoon light. "Lesson 1, I told him. Cracks let the truth seep through." On the table lay months of my life receipts, emails, bank logs, hidden recordings, even a copy of the forged deed. Every lie I had once swallowed now had its place on paper. I'd labeled everything by date and motive. Daniel flipped through each section slowly, his fingers tapping in quiet admiration. "Ethan and Sophie won't see this coming," he said. I just nodded. I'm not sure they ever saw me either. He asked if I wanted to move forward a temporary hold on all property transfers, official notice to the notary office, and a pending investigation for fraud. I watched the steam rise from my tea again. For a moment I thought about Claire, her soft voice, her trembling hands when she realized what he'd done. Then I thought about the silence that had carried me this far. "Yes," I said finally, "it's time. Would you have done the same? Would you have chosen justice over peace?" Daniel leaned forward. "Once we file this, they'll know. Are you ready for that?" I smiled slow and steady. They've been counting on me to stay quiet all my life. Then I looked down at the cup again, tracing the hairline crack with my thumb. Let them hear me now, through the cracks. He typed up the orders while I reviewed every word. I'd been a teacher too long not to check the spelling of my own justice. When the documents printed, the sound filled the office paper sliding into truth. He handed me a pen. My signature didn't tremble. Outside, the wind moved through the maples, soft, persistent, almost like applause. I closed the folder, tucked it into my bag, and said quietly, "Sometimes you just have to let the cracks show." By dusk, Ethan had already received the notification. All accounts frozen. 3 words, clean, precise, merciless. I imagined his face reading it, confusion melting into panic, and Sophie's hand trembling as she typed another email, one that would never reach me. She tried to threaten me, of course, said she'd make the truth disappear. But by then, every file, every recording, every photo was already in the cloud. A student of mine once said, "The internet never forgets." I smiled, remembering. Neither does a mother. If you've ever held evidence in your hands that finally set you free, tell me below. If silence once protected you until your voice returned, share it. Follow Family Revenge Stories, where justice finds its whisper. When I got home that night, the sky was silver and low clouds hanging heavy like unspoken prayers. I boiled water again, habit more than need, and poured it into the same cracked cup. The tea was bitter, but it felt honest. Each sip carried weight, the kind that settles deep in the chest and stays warm long after. I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. Somewhere across town, they were probably realizing that the quiet woman they'd underestimated had rewritten the ending. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with evidence and time. I lifted the cup, turning it slightly to watch the thin line along its rim. A crack, yes, but it hadn't broken. Neither had I. The tea was bitter, but justice brewed stronger. The table was round polished walnut, old enough to remember better days. The afternoon light slid across it in golden bands, soft but unforgiving. At its center lay a single black folder, thick, silent, heavy as truth itself. I'd placed it there on purpose, like a mirror no one wanted to look into. 4 cups of tea steamed between us, mine steady, theirs untouched. Daniel Ross sat at the far end, calm as ever, pen aligned with the paper. No one spoke. You could hear the breath of the house. Even silence seemed to be listening. Truth doesn't tremble. It was Claire who finally broke the hush. "Mom, why did you ask us here?" Her voice was thin, careful, the same voice she used when she was a little girl and thought she'd done something wrong. I smiled, not to soften, but to steady. "To finish what started with a lie," I said. Then I opened the folder. The first page, an email between Ethan and Sophie, time-stamped confident. The second, the forged signature on the deed. The third, a photograph of Sophie's lipstick on Ethan's letter, a pale coral stain that told more than any confession could. Ethan's face went gray. Sophie's went blank. Daniel looked from one to the other, expression unreadable, as I turned the next page. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. "You took my trust," I said quietly. I took back the truth. If you'd been there, would you have spoken, or just watched as silence did its work? Ethan tried first, his words scrambling for safety. "Margaret, this isn't what it looks like." I met his eyes that once asked for my daughter's hand, that once called me Mom. "Then enlighten me," I said softly. "What does betrayal look like, Ethan?" I might have forgotten. He opened his mouth, then shut it. Even his hands betrayed him, fingers twitching against the glass of untouched tea. Sophie's tears came next, sudden and loud, breaking the air like a dropped plate. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she said. I nodded. "And yet you did." Claire sat motionless, her gaze fixed on the folder. Not on me, not on them, just the folder, as if she could fall into it and never come back. I slid one final document across the table, Daniel's legal notice. "All assets frozen pending investigation," it read. Ethan's breath caught. Claire's lip trembled. But I wasn't finished. "There's more," I said. From my purse I pulled the flash drive, the recordings, the transfers, the lies caught in their own echoes. I placed it beside the folder, neat and small. It looked harmless, but so does arsenic. Daniel nodded slowly, then looked at me. "You've done everything by the book, Mrs. Hayes. There's nothing left to say." I exhaled. The air in the room changed. He was right. Justice doesn't shout. It just stands up and waits for silence to catch up. Claire's eyes finally lifted to mine. Tears clung to her lashes, trembling but not falling. "Mom," she whispered, "how long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. Then, gentler, too long. She looked at Ethan, then at Sophie at the wreckage of her own faith. And then she reached into her bag, pulled out a folded envelope, and laid it next to the black folder. A divorce form, already signed, already dated. Daniel didn't move. Sophie sobbed. Ethan's shoulders collapsed under the weight of what he'd built. And me. I just watched the light shift across the papers, truth shining truth still. If you've ever seen justice arrive without a word, tell me below. If your silence ever spoke louder than your anger, share it. Follow family revenge stories where women reclaim their voice through calm fire. No one spoke for a long time. The tea had gone cold. The clock ticked like a metronome for guilt. Claire stood, her voice barely a breath. "I'm done, Mom." I reached across the table and touched her hand. Her skin was cold, but her grip was steady. For the first time in years, her eyes held mine without fear. Ethan tried to speak again, some last attempt at saving face, but the sound caught in his throat. He looked at me, searching for mercy, maybe memory. There was neither left to give. The sun began to fade. The last light fell across the folder, making the black cover gleam like polished stone. Daniel closed it gently, the soft click of finality echoing in the room. I rose, smoothing my sleeve, my voice low. No one leaves until truth does. And with that, I poured what was left of my tea into the sink. It was cold, bitter, but steady. Truth doesn't tremble. The house felt heavier after everyone left. Not loud, not broken, just heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath, afraid to move. The scent of tea and cold porcelain lingered in the dining room, mixed with something older, the kind of quiet that stays long after words have died. I walked past the table, eyes drawn to the same corner. His chair, still there, still waiting. The afternoon light touched its edge, carving gold along the wood grain. It was just a chair, but absence has a voice too. For years that seat had belonged to Ethan. He'd pull it out with a half laugh, always too loud, always pretending we were a family that didn't hurt. And now it stood empty, no shadow, no warmth, no lies left to fill it. I thought justice would silence the ache, but justice only rearranges the furniture of the heart. I made myself some tea. The kettle hissed softly like an old friend sighing. When I sat down, I couldn't bring myself to choose a new chair. I just stared at his, still tucked in slightly, as if he'd returned to finish what he started. The silence wasn't cruel anymore. It was present, and it remembered. Silence remembers. I opened my laptop, the faint hum of the screen cutting through the stillness. There it was, the last recording Daniel had sent back to me. Evidence, proof, closure. I hesitated before pressing play. First came the static, then Sophie's voice cracking, desperate, caught between regret and fear. "Please, Ethan, stop. It's done. She knows." And his voice shaking, smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't mean to. I thought we could fix it." Then the sound I'll never forget, crying. Not angry tears, not guilt, just the sound of two people finally realizing the cost of their choices. I let it play until the end. No fast forward, no pause. When it stopped, I didn't delete it. I just renamed the file Closure. If you've ever listened to the echo of your own forgiveness, tell me below. If silence once healed you more than words ever could, share it. Follow family revenge stories where healing comes dressed in truth. Outside, the day began to dim. The light slipped lower across the floor, turning every reflection into a ghost. On the windowsill sat a small porcelain bird, white-chipped, its left wing cracked clean through. Ethan had bought it years ago from a roadside stand, said it reminded him of freedom. Back then I believed him. Now it caught the sunset, like it still had a purpose. The gold light kissed its broken edge, and for a heartbeat it glowed. That's when I realized even the wounded still shine if you place them in the right light. Maybe that's what justice really is, not punishment, but illumination. The truth revealed in all its fractures. Hours passed. The tea cooled. I stayed. The clock whispered the same rhythm over and over, the kind that sounds like forgiveness when you stop resisting it. The door creaked around 7. I didn't turn right away. I knew that voice. Mom Claire stood there hesitant, carrying her coat like a question. Her face was pale, but her eyes were different. They carried something soft, something surrendered. She walked closer, her steps careful on the old wood floor. "Can I sit?" I nodded. She pulled out the chair across from me, not his, but near it. For a long while we didn't speak. We just breathed in the same space. And then she whispered, "I need to learn how to trust again." Her voice cracked on trust. I reached for her hand. It was cold, trembling like spring thaw. "You will," I said, "but start with yourself first." After she left, I stayed a little longer. The chair beside me didn't feel so empty anymore. It was part of the story, the one that had to end so another could begin. The cracks in the porcelain bird caught the last trace of twilight burning faintly before fading into silver. The room exhaled soft and final. I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, peace didn't feel like loneliness. Absence has a voice too, and sometimes it speaks love. Even an empty chair remembers love. The smell of chalk dust and pine trees mixed in the morning air. The lake shimmered through the open windows, its surface calm, like it was listening. I stood in front of a small blackboard, white chalk, trembling slightly between my fingers. The old wood floors creaked under every step, a rhythm of memory of return. 10 women sat before me, notebooks open, eyes uncertain but searching. They'd come here not for writing, but for release, for something they couldn't name but could no longer silence. Outside, a bird cried once, and then the stillness returned. The lesson I said softly was never about others. A pause. It was about me. When I first imagined this class, I thought I'd teach them what I'd learned: how to protect themselves, how to see warning signs, how to walk away before love turns to trap. But as I watched their faces that morning, tired, beautiful, fragile, I realized I wasn't teaching. I was confessing. I drew 3 words on the board: pain, power, peace. The chalk squeaked faintly, breaking the silence, like breath after a long cry. A woman in the front row whispered, "Can we really find peace after all that?" I smiled gently. "Not find. Remember." She frowned, not understanding. So I said, "Peace was always there. It just got buried under other people's noise." For a moment, no one wrote anything. Then pens began to move, slow, deliberate, like each letter carried a heartbeat. The lake wind pushed through the room, carrying the scent of wet leaves and something softer. Freedom, maybe. After the break, I told them my story. Not the public version, not the one tied neatly with justice and proof. The real one. The long nights after, when silence felt heavier than betrayal. When I'd wake at 2 a.m. expecting to hear a voice that was no longer welcome. When forgiveness wasn't a choice, just exhaustion dressed as mercy. They listened. One woman, Grace, covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Another, Ruth, clenched her fists, whispering. He took my laughter. I nodded. Mine too. For a while. Would you have shared your wounds in a room like that? If your silence could set someone free, would you break it? The sun climbed higher, painting gold across the blackboard. Chalk dust floated like tiny ghosts, catching the light dissolving into air. I realized then, this was my classroom, yes, but it was also my confession booth. And every woman there was both student and teacher. By the 3rd session, something shifted. They began reading their own pieces, short stories, letters, even a poem or 2. One wrote to her younger self. Another wrote to the man who'd never say sorry. And one, she wrote to the girl in the mirror she'd stopped looking at 20 years ago. Their words weren't perfect. They weren't supposed to be. They were raw, trembling alive like truth, finally remembering its own name. When they finished, I erased the board. White chalk smeared into gray clouds, faint but visible. I left one line untouched. The lesson was never about others. It was about me. They noticed. Grace whispered, "Why leave that one?" I smiled. "Because I'm still learning it. If you've ever turned your pain into a lesson for someone else, tell me below. If silence has ever taught you more than words, share it. Follow Family Revenge Stories, where healing begins with truth." After class, I walked to the lake alone. The wind had calmed. The water reflected the sky wide and forgiving. I sat on a stone bench and listened. No voices, no ghosts, just waves brushing against the shore. Somewhere behind me, the women were laughing, a sound soft but strong. It felt like music made of healing. I thought of Ethan, of Sophie, of Claire. I didn't hate them anymore, not because they deserved peace, but because I did. I'd carried their shadows long enough. Now it was time to let the light through. I closed my eyes. The warmth of the sun touched my face. For the first time in years, I didn't feel heat as anger. I felt it as life. When I returned to the classroom, I wrote one last word on the board: enough. Not in bitterness, but in gratitude. Because the story was never about revenge. It was about return to myself, to voice, to stillness. As I packed my things, the chalk dust clung to my fingertips, soft and familiar. Outside, the lake shimmered again, gentle, endless whole. I smiled, leaving the windows open, letting the breeze erase what was left on the board. The lesson was never about others. It was about me. And finally, I understood what peace sounds like. The first spring after everything ended felt different. The air was warmer, lighter, as if even the wind had finally exhaled. I opened the windows wide that morning, letting the scent of new paint and blooming earth drift through. The lake outside shimmered like glass, calm and forgiving. Claire was in the garden, her laughter mingling with the voice of her little girl, my granddaughter chasing sunlight through the rows of young sunflowers. I watched them from the doorway, my hands still speckled with white paint. The world, it seemed, had learned how to breathe again. And for the first time in years, so had I. Broken wings still know the way home. We were painting the last room together, the one Ethan used to call his study. The walls had been stripped bare, washed of memory. Claire dipped her brush in the pale yellow can and smiled. "Do you think he'll ever come back, Mom?" she asked quietly. I looked at her, the sunlight soft against her face. "No," I said, "and that's the point." The room fell silent for a while, just the soft rhythm of bristles against the wall. Outside, the child's laughter rose again, clear, alive, unafraid, the kind of sound that rebuilds something you thought was lost forever. When we finished, I placed the small porcelain bird back on the windowsill. Its wing, once cracked and dull, now shimmered with gold. Claire touched it gently. "You fixed it." I smiled. "No. I just helped it remember how to hold the light. Would you have kept something broken just to see it shine again? If you've ever rebuilt yourself piece by piece, tell me below." Follow Family Revenge Stories, where healing is its own kind of justice. Later that evening, when the house grew quiet, I sat by the window with a stack of letters. They'd come from women I'd never met, women who'd heard my story. Each one carried a different voice but the same heartbeat. One wrote, "You gave me the courage to leave." Another, "I finally forgave myself." And one, "I didn't know silence could be this strong." I read them slowly, one after another, until the words blurred into something bigger than me. Maybe this was what peace looked like, not an ending but a ripple. The sound of other lives healing because you dared to speak. I looked up at the fading sky, its colors melting from rose to porcelain blue. Justice isn't revenge. It's peace found after the storm. The letter came a few weeks later, unmarked, folded with handwriting I knew by heart. Ethan. I held it for a long time before opening it. Inside, just one line. "You were right. No plea, no excuses, just that." I read it once, then again, and then I placed it back in the envelope and tucked it into the drawer beside the bird. Some stories don't need replies. Some apologies are better left unanswered, not out of bitterness, but grace. When justice and peace finally meet, you stop needing closure. You just live. If you've ever received an apology too late and chose silence instead, you already understand. Because silence remembers, and sometimes silence forgives. That night, as twilight settled across the lake, the three of us sat on the porch. Claire braided her daughter's hair while I held a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The air carried the faint hum of crickets, the smell of wet soil, the warmth of belonging. The repaired bird caught the last rays of sunset gold on white gleaming like a promise kept. Its new wing wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. Perfection was never the point. Resilience was. The child looked up at me and asked, "Grandma, does the bird still remember how to fly?" I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. Broken wings still know the way home." The lake held the sky in its stillness, porcelain blue, unbroken, infinite. And in that quiet reflection, I saw myself again, whole golden at the edges, light passing through. The sky was porcelain again, and so was I.